Hello, welcome. I'm going to be doing the mid-year freakout tag because it is the middle of 2023 and I'm freaking out. But I'm not freaking out about books, so I don't really know why it's called that. Now, before we get started, some questions you might have about what's going on right now. Maybe one of the questions is, hey, why are you wearing a sun hat and also a blanket while you're sitting outside? Number one, sun protection is important. And number two, mind your own business. I'm also eating a bowl of grapes. So, I'm a multifaceted woman. I contain multitudes within me. Okay, let's get to the book tag. The first question is, best book I've read so far in 2023. I think I said this in my last video, but I think that would have to be Animal by Lisa Taddeo. The reason that I didn't say the author's name at all in the last video is because I realized as I was editing it that I was pronouncing her last name completely wrong. Anyways, this story follows a woman named Joan who's in her 30s and she moves... Oh, my neighbor's there. Please go away. He can't hear me from here. I don't think he can. The story follows a woman named Joan who's in her 30s after she moves from New York to LA after a married man she had been seeing shoots himself in front of her and also a bunch of other people. And I'm not spoiling anything when I tell you that because it's revealed at the beginning of the novel. The story unfolds effortlessly and the pacing doesn't leave you bored halfway through. I feel like some works of contemporary fiction do, at least for me. Taddeo's prose is captivating in the way that she describes LA and the other characters and the house that she ends up moving into in LA. And there's also a really interesting narrative device that sort of pops up throughout the book that sort of gives the whole story a different perspective and a different purpose. I just think it was super smart and really, really well crafted. Okay, number two is best sequel you've read so far in 2023. I'm combining this, unfortunately, with biggest disappointment, and that's going to be A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers. This is the sequel to A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, which I read in January and actually really liked. It's part of the Wayfarers series. Chambers is also the author of the Monk and Robot duology, the first of which is one of my favorite books ever. But anyways, this book just didn't hit the same as A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. I like the first book for the characters and the alien cultures and how they sort of dealt with cultural relativism, but instead of different cultures, it's entirely different species. That was probably my favorite part of the first book, and this book had some of that, but it also just had some really, really uninteresting characters and plot lines that were just kind of a flop. The story is told in two separate timelines that eventually converge at the end, and one of the timelines focused on this one character that I hated so much, and that I wasn't, the reader's not supposed to hate them, but she was so badly written that I hated any time that we had to jump to that timeline. Maybe you can see my face better if I do this. It was as if Chambers had never been a teenager and had absolutely no idea how to write a realistic teenage character. It was just so annoying, and there were so many little things that this character said that just got on my nerves so much because it could have been an interesting story, but it wasn't, because that character and that sort of whole plot line was just bad. I was talking to this employee at a bookstore and I was talking to him about my disappointment with this book, and he said the third one is better and it goes back a little bit to the characters that are present in the first novel, and so maybe one day I'll pick up the third one. Okay, new release you haven't read yet but want to. It would probably have to be How Far the Light Reaches, A Life in 10 Sea Creatures by Sabrina Imbler. It was released in December of 2022, so I'm counting that as a new release. It's a collection of essays on different sea creatures and some of their more bizarre and beautiful qualities. The Goodreads description says that it explores themes of adaptation, survival, sexuality, and care, weaves the wonders of marine biology with stories of their own family relationships and coming of age. So it just seems like a good entry point for learning a bit more about marine biology. And every time I see it in a bookstore, I am very tempted. Okay, it got too hot again. Okay, the next prompt is Biggest Surprise. I think this would have to probably be Lonely Castle in the Mirror by Mizuki Sujimura. But not for a good reason. I was actually very surprised that I didn't like it. I read it because the one and only Allison Pages liked it so much that she got a tattoo of it. And I usually have like a pretty similar taste in books to her, and so I picked it up, and yeah, I didn't get it. The story is basically about a girl who doesn't want to go to school anymore because she's being bullied, and she discovers a mirror in her room that is a magic portal to a castle. And she meets a bunch of other kids there who also aren't going to school during the day, and they have to sort of complete this quest given to them by a little girl with a wolf mask to find a key before a certain time. And yeah, it was just super unmemorable. I either hated or felt completely indifferent to every single character in this. There was basically, in my opinion, no plot except for the very beginning and the very end of the book, where like the sort of whole mystery is revealed. But I just didn't care about it at all because the characters were so boring, and it just felt like a chore to pick up. New favorite author, debut, or new to you? I have to be Melissa Broder. I've only read one book by her so far. I read Milkfed, and I went into this book with like absolutely no expectations, and I was pleasantly surprised. It's about 24-year-old Rachel who grew up Jewish and is addicted to calorie restriction and has these sort of obsessive food rituals. Essentially is dealing with a really bad eating disorder that sort of stemmed from her childhood. She meets Orthodox Jewish woman Miriam at this frozen yogurt shop that she frequents, and Miriam like always wants to feed Rachel, and the story basically follows their relationship and each character's relationship with their own physical hunger and their sexual desire and their religion and all of their other needs, and how that sort of, you know, either brings them closer together or distances them from each other. This book totally grew on me as I continued to read it. It was really interesting to see how Rachel's desires and revulsions all sort of intertwined with each other. Also how her relationship with religion and eating slowly morph and change and shift as she becomes closer to Miriam. There are also some like really funny lines in this book, and I thought it was really good. And I'm looking forward to reading Pisces and any other book she releases. New favorite character. I had to think quite hard about this one, but I think it's probably Alonza from White Teeth by Zadie Smith. First of all, I don't even know where to begin with this book. I feel like, again, it's one of those books that like you could sit and analyze for hours, or you could just sort of read it for funsies and pleasure, but I think a lot of it's probably gonna go over your head if you read it that way, which is what I did. But it's definitely a book that I'm gonna reread. It's just a very, very involved story, and there's just so much symbolism and cultural references and really interesting references to immigrant culture, to youth culture, to progressiveness versus traditionalism, to feminism, to racism, but also just to like sibling dynamics and what your role is in your family, and like, you know, what mark you want to leave on this earth after you leave. Like, there's so much in this story, and I can't even call it a story because it feels like 10 different stories wrapped up in one novel. Anyways, the book takes place in London and revolves around Archie Jones and Samad Iqbal, two friends who met while fighting in World War II. But the story extends sort of through both their families and how their families interact with each other and within themselves and also their community. Anyways, the character Alma always has the absolute best lines. She is a recent immigrant from Bangladesh, and her marriage to Samad Iqbal was like cemented before she was even born, and she's like quite traditional in some of her values around family. Socially and politically, she's definitely more progressive, and yeah, she's just kind of like upset with what her life turned out to be, and she just gets some of the, not only like the best one-liners, but some of like the best and well-written passages in the entire book, which is saying a lot. I'll include some of Alonso's quotes here just because I think they're great. Next one is a book that made me happy. Honestly, I think it's probably Chronicle of a Death Foretold by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. This was also a book I would say I was surprised by because I read Love in the Time of Cholera in like 2021 and absolutely didn't vibe with it. But I really liked this one. I thought this one was fun. It's narrated by a man who returned to his hometown where a murder took place 20 plus years ago, and he's essentially trying to parse out what actually happened, because you learn that like at the time when the murder took place, like none of the motives were clear. No one really knew what was going on. There were a bunch of chances for people to stop it and nobody did. The book obviously like jumps around in terms of timeline a lot, but it's pretty easy to follow, and it's just sort of a joy to fall into the story. And it's also a pretty short book. What books do I want to read by the end of the year? Basically right now I'm just trying to read all of the books that I have physical copies of that I haven't read yet. It's a lot. It's a lot for me, like proportional to the amount of books that I own. There are a lot of them that I haven't read, so I'm gonna prioritize those so that they're not staring at me while I sleep and making me feel guilty. I still have not read Braiding Sweetgrass, and I think I haven't read it because I know I'm gonna love it, and so I'm kind of scared. I'm either scared of reading it because I'm afraid it won't live up to the expectations that I have, or I'm like waiting for the perfect time to read it, which there's never going to be that time. I also still haven't read a single Joan Didion book, and that is also one of my top priorities for this year. Anyways, that's it. There are some questions on this tag that I didn't answer just because I didn't really have answers for them. The 3 that I didn't answer were most anticipated release for the second half of the year, which I just don't really have one that I can think of. The second one was newest fictional crush, which I just don't have, sorry. And the third one is book that made me cry, which a book hasn't made me cry, I don't think, this year so far. Anyways, that's all I have for you right now. Adios.